So this project called Anthropology for Kids, and the book What is Wealth, very actual subject. I was working for almost like half a year with kids from Karuna, who is in a difficult situation in Berlin. We were working together on a book that will come after these workshops as the final version for the publication. And here's only pages with the kids' stories. And it was really cool to work with these kids. They're from very different social cultural backgrounds, some from Russia, some from Afrin, some from East Germany, West Germany, and of course they know a lot about what is poverty and wealth, more than probably people who is right now here. And it's very interesting that during the time when they were telling their stories, they mostly were describing richness without thinking or talking about money. So they would say stuff about their childhood, about garden that their parents own, or the land in Syria. Would be the description of wealth. But when they would talk and write about poverty, then the money would come to the picture, and then they will say, oh, like, this is an amount that's enough, and this is the amount after which you start to experience misery. And they can precisely, in detail, say why. Like, after you spend, like, €2.50 on the transportation, and, like, €4 on the sandwich, then your money gone for the day. And this, like, 14 days a month, you can survive, and then you don't have anything to eat. Something like that. So that was really a great experience, and I want to thank the Ministry of Education and Research, Kulturmachstak. It's your participation that helped to organize this project. And also I want to thank Alexander Koch, who is not here now because he's sick, but he was a big part of this whole project and helped to develop it over the last years. Yeah. And now I want to introduce my guest, and hopefully we all can talk together after that. So it's Ilona Otta, David Kreper, and Frank Ekster.
Oh, I have mine. I can use my own. I think everyone has his own. Okay.
And they all work, right?
Yeah. Very good. Very professional. Hi, my name is Frank. As Nika already said, I wrote a huge book about money. More specific, a huge book about money in our capitalist society. And as money obviously has something to do with wealth, or has a lot to do with wealth, this is why I'm here today. So I'm not an expert of how nature is a form of wealth for us, like Ilona. I'm also not an expert how different wealth has been in history and in different societies of the past, like David. I will only ask what is wealth today in our capitalist society, and I will do it in a quite strong economical sense. So if you ask people what is wealth, it sooner or later turns out that we have two kinds of wealth. Wealth is twofold. There's wealth in all the things and goods we need and use, from nature to basic needs like food, clothes, housing. Yeah, my English is not so stable, sorry for that. Clothes, housing, to art and pure luxury stuff. This wealth can also be immaterial, like free time or playing a game or doing sports. So that's the one side of wealth. On the other hand, there is a pure form of wealth as such, an abstract wealth and richness, namely in value and money. This wealth is quite the opposite of the former one. Here, not the use and not the quality is what counts, but the quantity and the amount. This dual character of wealth, the multitude of things for needs and use on the one hand, and the magnitude of value and money on the other, is also what the economists found out, and it was in particular important for Karl Marx, who has analyzed this double character of wealth and of the economy as a whole. So the question then is, why do we have these two sides and how do they come together? How are all the things we need and use connected with the abstract side of wealth? Well, we all know how their connection is, as we all practice it every day. It is simply that we can exchange one into the other. We exchange the qualitative side into the quantitative side. In short, things against money. This is what we do when we sell and buy. So the two sides of wealth are indeed separated, and they must be separated. But this separation is why they can and in fact must be exchanged. But when wealth presents us in this exchange and transformation, then it presents itself different. Wealth is neither the goods we need, nor is it the money, and wealth is also not simply both sides together. Wealth is this form to exchange them. One side alone does not make sense. We need both sides of wealth to get into contact with each other and build an economy and a whole society based on exchange. But we also know this is not the whole story. The whole problem we all stuck in is that wealth is not simply there and ready to exchange. Neither all the things are simply given to us, nor is value and money simply there for us. Both must somehow be produced and earned. We don't go at morning out of the house to exchange things against money. We must work before. So wealth must be produced, and in fact both sides of the wealth. The things must be produced, and we must work therefore. And for this we have on the one hand means of production, and on the other hand workers who have an income so that they can buy what they have produced. So with this necessity we have again a new definition of wealth. At the beginning we had these two sides, all the things we need and use on the one hand, and on the other hand an abstract wealth in the form of value and money. Then we saw that the real wealth is the interchangeability and compatibility of these two sides. But now we see that both sides must be produced, and that we must produce them with means of production before we can do this exchange. So the real wealth is then simply that we can produce wealth, but we also must produce it. Without this production, wealth simply does not exist. That sounds simply and banal, but look at former societies. They haven't had the same amount of wealth. They were not as rich as we are. And so why is that? It is because they were not only less productive, they had a different way of production as such. One difference, maybe the main difference, is that these former societies in the past had not produced this abstract side of wealth. Only in capitalism, this abstract side, value and money, is what we produce, and this is simply why we call it all capitalism. But then also this production of wealth had a twofold character. On the one hand, it produces goods, on the other hand, value and money. We can even go a step further. Also inside the production, we must have this twofold character. On the one hand, we have our ability to work, all our knowledge and skills, our means of production, all the material and qualities we use, etc. But on the other hand, all these enters in the production as values, and this is the springing point, also we ourselves must sell our work to get money. Without working for money, for an income, we are poor. So our wealth is only the other hand of our poorness. We have nothing if we don't work and sell our labor time. We have nothing to exchange in our life and our time, and we must exchange to produce things and get money for that. So to conclude, I think we have to understand wealth not as a thing, be it all the goods or be it an amount of money. We have to understand wealth as the form to produce this kind of wealth and the form to share and exchange it. Wealth is not a thing, not an object. It is a social form or even a method, a way how to organize our society and how to create and produce wealth. The next question would be, In this society based on labor, is there a way to get rich without work? This is the same question as, is there exploitation in this society? And the even bigger question would be, is there a possibility to have wealth with nobody working? This is the same question as, what could be a non-capitalist or a communist society look like? And maybe the ultimate question, can we even produce free time or disposable time, as Marx called it, calling it the real wealth of the future society? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. My name is Lona Otto. I'm working as a researcher at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Thank you for inviting me here. And I'm not really an expert on wealth. I'm an expert on natural resources and climate change or climate change impacts. But somehow I got to this topic of wealth. So I do research, for instance, on mitigation of climate change. So, like, what are the options to mitigate climate change? And also, like, what has to be done at the end, or how to change the emissions patterns. And most of research on climate change mitigation is looking at the kind of countries, like countries as sort of like the objects or subjects, maybe who emit the CO2 emissions, to produce the carbon emissions. But but actually, kind of, when you think about it, it's like, does Germany emits carbon, or the US? No. At the end, it comes to the people, who are buying, certain goods or services, and they are like ultimately responsible for the emissions. So I can also do research about, what kind of emissions are linked to like my life or your life or people in different countries, different world regions. And then I got to the topic of like inequalities, environmental inequalities, and also the understanding of wealth. So ultimately, I mean, kind of in my perception, I think you can link the wealth to actually natural resources. Yeah. So at the end, it's about the land, the energy, water, clean air, and such resources, goods, and it's also sort of like a competitive or competition sort of like story, because so I also do research on something what's called like common pool resources, or also can think of global commons. What is it? It's like it's a resource where if you, let's say it's a pen. It's a private resource. So like I have this pen and you cannot have this pen if I hold it. Yeah. But there are also those resources that are called like common pool resources, and they can be shared. But there is also some capacity, that they meet this sort of like a generation rate that you have to sustain in order to maintain the resources. A typical example would be like a forest. So you have a forest, and it's fine to cut down some trees, and the forest will regrow, and it's all fine. But if you cut down too many trees, then the forest will collapse and it will not regrow anymore. And you can think with the same, kind of similar terms about climate, because at the end, climate is also a common pool resource, or clean air is a common pool resource. So if you, if one person produces too many CO2 emissions, they cannot be absorbed anymore by the Earth system, and they lead to the pollution. Like carbon becomes a pollution that heats up the Earth, and then we all have to pay the price. Yes, and so how it's linked to the wealth. So I did some research about what kind of who is responsible, what kind of people are responsible for what kind of share of carbon emissions, like due to their kind of lifestyles, like consumption patterns. And what I found out, actually kind of together with Nika also, was that if you look at the super rich kind of persons, like the 0.5% of the most wealthy human or Earth inhabitants, they are responsible for about the same emissions as 50% of the poorest, just to show the proportions. Yeah, and it kind of got us to the topic of wealth and inequalities. At the end, it's about the inequalities and also and those kind of environmental events or pollution that is actually affecting the poorest. Because if you think about climate change impacts. The rich, like in terms of the countries or like individuals, they are fine, especially if you think about the individuals, they can, take their private jets and then just fly away if there's some, in most of the cases, if there's some negative climate change impacts happening. But if you think of the poor, they mostly live in the global south, they don't have that much money, they are not so mobile, so actually they are paying the cost, And also if you think about the carbon tax, I mean, I'm not against the carbon tax, and I think, we need something in that area, but what is happening in Paris recently is actually, and I understand, I fully with the people there, because it's actually like imposing the cost to clean up the waste that was produced by the richest. It's, at the end, there will be the ordinary citizens, probably the middle class, who will have to pay for those costs to clean up the mess, And that's kind of like, I got kind of recently to those topics, and I try to bring it to the topic of sustainability transformation, kind of just, how to achieve a just transformation. And maybe, just to kind of finish up this kind of short introduction, I thought it was interesting what you said about children and how they envisage wealth. I've heard a story that if you ask like children, young people, who they want to be in the future, they say like, oh, I want to have like a family and children and happy life. But then somehow when they grow up, they get to this kind of money thing, and they just want to have more and more. And this is something about our species, that brought us so much development and progress, but on the other hand, it's also kind of destructive, not only for us as the species, but for the whole planet. So it's kind of a bit tragic, but I'm looking forward to your perspective. Maybe you know the answers.
Okay, let me try to work on that one. Okay, hi. My name's David. I'm an anthropologist. Yeah, okay. Actually, I was thinking of something Frank said, but also I will try to do my best with your question. You're saying that previous generations were it's interesting because it's not entirely clear that that's true. That's assuming that there is some kind of objective measure of wealth, so you can count how many things people have, how many calories, how much energy they use. People use all sorts of ways to say, you can look from culture to culture and say which one is richer and which one is poorer. But of course, different societies have completely different ideas of what wealth is or what wealth should be. And thinking about this, because I've been reading a lot of accounts by French missionaries and travelers in what's now Quebec in Canada in the 1600s mostly. And they often had these very heated arguments with the indigenous Americans. Back then they just called them Americans. Americans were Indians. They had these big arguments with the Americans about who was richer. And it really, really annoyed the missionaries when these people, Mi'kmaq and Wendat and other indigenous people said, well, you guys are really poor compared to us because you're just miserable all the time. You're just constantly, you don't feel you have enough, so you feel poor, but we don't feel poor. We everything we want, we got a lot of. This made a lot of the French people really angry because they thought these people were entirely missing out on the point of life. But well, they made a reasonable case. They said, well, first of all, you have no freedom. That you guys live all the time in fear of your commanders, whereas we don't care. If our chief tells us to do something we don't want to do, we just laugh at him. What's he going to do? And second of all, you have no security. You're all terrified you're going to end up a beggar on the street if you don't play your cards right. Well, here that never happens. We take care of each other. You're constantly competing with each other, so you're nervous and upset all the time. So we feel we're rich because, we get to live like only rich people in your society live. We get to relax and just take what we want. Because, the things that we actually think are important, we have enough of. And this is a very interesting theme because these conversations had a lot of effect. I mean, the people who heard them took them very seriously. Books of these missionary accounts